What's up, y'all? Welcome back. Welcome back. Tonight, we are talking about Christianity in the appeal of how people see us. So, I think a lot of people interpret grace or forgiveness as weakness, not having a backbone, not being able to stick up for yourself, as if turning the other cheek is something that makes you a pushover.
You muted yourself.
Sorry about that. How turning the other cheek is something that makes you a pushover, or forgiving for things that you feel as though you shouldn't makes you weak. But in reality, walking with Christ is an act of courage, an act of discipline, an act of conviction. And to be able to do it and do it effectively when the entire world mocks your religion, mocks your faith, and holds you to a lower standard than you feel you should due to you understanding the truth, it's sometimes very difficult. So to persevere, to be able to stand in truth, and to be able to walk with Christ all the way till the end is a stamp of not only strength, but to be a believer. So tonight we are going to delve into that. What does it mean to be a weak Christian, and why do you think that people assume Christians are weak?
Well, okay, so the accusation that Christians are weak is, I think it's misunderstood because both the message of Christ, right, and the message of the Father and historic reality, right? It's 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 completely the opposite when you actually study the history, right? History shows you that the disciples were strong. History shows you that Jesus is the strongest man to ever live. And history shows you that God is someone of great strength, which is why people, fall to their knees when they glorify him, right? So Christianity calls for strength in spirit, strength in courage under persecution, under moral conviction, even if it costs you everything, right? I think true Christian strength is not just about, dominating people. It's not just about, you know, being the biggest, the baddest, the toughest, right? It's actually about standing just firm when the world tells you to bow, right? So when the world tells you to bow, you
Right.
just stand firm. It doesn't mean I have to be the most aggressive. It doesn't mean I have to be the biggest. It doesn't mean I have to be the strongest. It doesn't mean I have to be the most deceitful. It just means when your number is called and they say, everyone take a knee and bow at my feet, you are the last one standing. That's what
Mhm.
this means. And that's actually a testimony of true courage and true strength, right? Because most people would look at someone, if there's 1,000 people in a room and 999 of them are all bowing to, someone in front of them, and one person is standing up, they're going to think he's crazy.
Right. Absolutely.
So this is not cowardice. This is not weak. This is a person who has the strength and the courage to be the oddball out, to be the standout, to be what Christ calls us to be, which is, courageous.
Yeah, I mean, I recently learned that in Revelation, I think I said this another time. In Revelation, it says the cowardice don't get into heaven. And when I
Mhm.
heard that, I said, "Ah, what?" Like it hurt me. I was like, "Oh gosh, what do I need to do?"
Yeah.
It is very it's a very difficult calling to be able to follow Christ, and anybody who tells you it's just easy and they just walking on rainbows is probably not living it the way that he desires us to. So
Mhm.
I was watching Philip Anthony Mitchell. I really love a lot of his sermons and being able to listen to his perspective when it comes to interpreting the Bible. It's I think it's my volume. 1 second, it's echoing just a little bit. But yeah, I like to hear his interpretations when it comes to the Bible. And he's had one sermon that was focusing on the broad way, um, versus the narrow path. And
Mhm.
this sermon was so convicting to me because it not only highlighted the big sins that we think, right? Like the homosexuality, drug addiction, fornication, all of those things, right? It doesn't really he wasn't speaking about that specifically. He was more talking about being able to understand what it takes to squeeze through that narrow gate, and he had a metaphor that was saying, if it's my spirit or my flesh, if I'm carrying around my fleshly desires, if I'm carrying around the things that are heavy, trying to squeeze through this narrow gate, it's not saying that only one person or a couple people can get in at a time and we kind of like all squiggling in. It's almost like you're barely going to make it, So you got to drop those fleshly desires to be able to squeeze through that gate. And so when it comes down to being cowardice, or like I spoken last in our last stream about small nuances that sometimes people miss because they're looking at the big sins, and they're looking at they're skipping over being effeminate as a man, or they're skipping over gossiping, or they're skipping over things that they feel like, oh, we all tell little white lies and stuff. Those things matter. So to be courageous and to be disciplined and to really understand what it takes to to live this life and walk that narrow path is courage.
Yeah.
It is.
Yep.
And I think we are sometimes trying to prove it so bad instead of living it.
Yeah, and I think that Christianity in itself, right? I think it redefines strength, right?
Right.
And the reason I say that is I actually have a verse from, let me pull it up. It's from Second Corinthians, right? And it says, when I am weak, then I am strong. This is Second Corinthians 12, 9 through 10. It says, when I am weak, then I am strong, right? And this isn't a verse that's saying, I have to go through being, pummeled into the ground to feel like something, right? This is stating that when you recognize your real strength, it comes from the dependence on God, not pride, right?
Yeah.
So it shows you that when you are at your lowest, right? When you are at your lowest, when you're at your bottom, right? If you can finally set your pride aside, this is when you'll notice that you actually prevail, you become stronger, right? Because this is a spiritual connection between you and God. So this is why you often find, a lot of times, actually, when you think about it, a lot of people who we see, on social media, or you meet in real life, or even pastors, bishops, any of these people, right? A lot of times the reason that we connect with them, and a lot of times the reason we like, oh, I like this person, is because when they tell you their testimony, it doesn't come from what? It doesn't come from when they're at the top. It comes from when they're at the bottom. It comes from when they were like, I was homeless. It comes from when they say, I was sleeping out of my car. It comes from when they were saying, I was bouncing from my friend's house to my mom's house. My mom kicked me out the house. It comes from when they were at their weakest, is when they found out that they were actually strong. Is when they were at their weakest, is when they found out, I can actually see my strength now. So a lot of times, this is why even when you work out, right, your body breaks down, your muscles break down, but and you're like, man, I feel what? Weak.
Yeah.
But you're actually getting stronger in the
That's a good
process.
metaphor. That's
So
a good
this
metaphor.
is the purpose. The purpose is your body, your spiritual muscles need to get broken down to the ground, right? And once they heal, you take some pre-workout, you take some creatine, take some protein, your spiritual muscles will come back stronger than ever. So weakness is not a sign of less strength. It's not a sign of weakness, even though this is weak, right? Weakness is just, you are at a bottom point in your life, you are going through something, and you find a way to say, even though I don't know how to pay my bills this month, even though I just got my car repoed, even though I can't pay my rent, even though my kids don't want to see me, even though me and my wife going through it, in those moments you say, how can I prevail, right? Because what it means really is, when you are vulnerable, can you figure out a way to use that vulnerability and turn it into a strength, right? This is why I don't believe that when you're angry, you should go back and forth with people, right? You should channel this and say, if someone offended you, instead of cussing them out and getting mad at them, right? This actually makes you a weak person if someone offends you and you cuss them out automatically, right? I would not say that's a strong person. A strong person to me is when someone offends you, right? And you turn that offense, and you are able to put that into words and convey yourself in a way where they're like, oh, I didn't know they was gonna respond like
Wisdom.
that. And now the person who just offended you feels like, oh, I feel like I feel awkward now. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you
um,
thought that was gonna make me mad, and I'm not mad. I'm chilling.
yeah, the Bible speaks about being slow to anger. You know,
Exactly.
it's unwise of a person to result to anger so quickly. And
Hmm.
that's something that I worked on, but has been very difficult understanding it from a biblical perspective. Not because I'm an angry person, but some things that call for anger, some things that call for that retaliation or that vengeful mindset sometimes in our carnal mind.
Hmm.
Um, is something that you have to avoid, something that you have to resist, something that you have to be strong in resisting. And I think that there's always a mentality of what you're not, focusing
Yeah.
on what you're not. And so that brings me to David and Goliath, right? I
Hmm.
love this story now. I'm watching House of David. I love it. It was amazing. And even when I read the biblical story about David and Goliath, I didn't really understand the magnitude of the courage it took for him to step into that role and what it meant for him to be elevated from such a weak presenting person into
Hmm.
this courageous king that God calls one of the greatest kings to ever exist, you know? And that story touches me so deeply, not because of the kingdom, not because of the inheritance, not because of the wealth, none of that. It it is a story of triumph for the person who is not understanding the abilities that are inside of them.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
even though I may feel like I'm not that courageous. I'm not this. I'm not that. It really puts in perspective what God sees within you and what it takes for you to humble yourself enough. Even like the Bible never calls us adults, right? He always visualizes us as children, and we would call children weak, vulnerable, all of those things. Can you mute that? I think it's echoing from your side. I'll mute when you speak as well. But the Bible calls never calls us adults because he doesn't see us that way. He doesn't see us as these human beings that are self-sufficient and self-reliant and needing to understand things for ourselves. He sees us as dependents, things, people that should depend on him and should trust in him and should consult him at every turn so that we are able to move forward in confidence with his guidance. And then again, this is something that if we weren't talking about God, this is something that people would consider weak. Oh, you need somebody to guide you, you need a mentor, you need a parent, you need to grow up. And we're always trying to be grown adults and prove to one another of how much we can conquer life and how smart we are and how knowledgeable we are, and never really insisting on humbling ourselves, because through your humbleness you gain wisdom versus knowledge. Through your humbleness you are able to see things from the broader perspective and not zoom in so far into the lens. And from your humbleness, you are able to truly kneel before the king. And I don't think that anybody is able to do that until they look at what people would deem as being weak.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I seen and what I've learned and what the Bible has taught me is that, you know, being a follower of Christ, the power comes from your spiritual resilience. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
refusing to compromise. You have to. And I'm
Mhm.
speaking to Christians in particular. You have to be able to refuse compromising your moral truth, even when you're mocked, canceled, or persecuted. This is I think this is what they're failing, and we're living in 2025. I think this is what Christians are failing at now. I see a lot of Christians, they're failing at refusing to compromise their faith. A lot of them are
Mhm.
compromising their faith to make people feel good, to not make anyone mad, to not feel like an outcast, to not lose friends, to not lose followers, right? But spiritual resilience is strength. You have to be willing to not compromise. You cannot compromise truth, being mocked, being canceled, And even if that means being persecuted, you cannot compromise the truth for this. And we don't have any spiritual resilience. This is why modern Christianity is seen as weak, because they're looking at our faith and they're saying, well, all I got to do is give you a couple dollars and you'll denounce. All I got to do is give you a couple girls and you'll denounce. All I got to do is, say pee in the closet and you'll denounce. All that This is the problem with modern Christianity is there's too many lukewarm Christians. So when it's time for you to step up, you can't step up because you were never really a follower in the first place, right? So I think history over times, over centuries, right? History has proved the strength of Christianity, with torture, with imprisonment, with death, persecutions, with people refusing to deny Christ, right? Look at the history. Right? Look at the history. The history shows you they have told Christians since the beginning, deny Christ and you live. They said no. Deny Christ and you'll live. They said no. Just you don't have to deny Christ, but just say, he's not God. No. They weren't willing to compromise what they know to be true, and they keep trying to get you to denounce Jesus is God or there is no Christ. And they back then, all the way up to modern days, people have not been able to denounce this. But now we're seeing, and which is why we're having this topic, people are starting to deny, but they're hiding it. They're hiding their denial. So you're like, oh, I believe them. But how do you know that they're hiding it? They're hiding it by, for example, you're a pastor and you go to a gay church and go preach.
Right.
You're hiding your denial. You
Well,
see,
you're not really hiding it, but I get what you're saying. You're
you're
trying to
deceiving.
mask. Yeah, you're trying to
You're
mask it.
deceiving. You're deceiving people, right? But the history of Christianity shows you people have been martyred. People have had missionaries. People had to go underground. Think about the people in China, right? You want to talk about strength? People in China for decades, right, had to go underground just to survive, right? Because they believed in Christ, but they were afraid of getting executed. They were afraid of getting persecuted. So they built underground spots for them to have secret church so they could live, right? So these people are doing things. A lot of people over history are doing things even though they know that this is going to cause death to them. Look at the people in Nigeria. People in Nigeria right now are getting persecuted because they're Christians. Just because they're Christians, not because they committed crimes, not because they started a war, not because they, broke into someone's house, not for any other reason other than they say, I believe in Christ. And they're like, oh, you got to go.
Yeah.
So history tells you it's when you're dying for something that you know to be true, it's impossible for you to say that this is a weak following. I don't see people getting persecuted that are Muslims. I don't see people getting persecuted that are Buddhists. I don't see Hindus getting persecuted because they're Hindus. The only people I see getting persecuted and mocked 24/7 every single day is people who follow Christ. Those are the only people I see getting mocked, canceled, called this, called that, all types of stuff.
Yeah. Even when you read the book of Psalms and you look at the prayers that David, Solomon, and like all of these, the authors of Psalms, the brothers from Asaph, but when you hear them speaking and you really delve into what they're saying and what they're praying to God, because Psalms, I just figured out, is very personal, like
Mm-hmm.
very personal. Like you almost, when you're reading it, you almost feel like, wow, because I think that there's a personal thing when you're listening to a husband and a wife have an intimate conversation, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, am I supposed to be here? What y'all talking about? Whatever. It's me. It's echoing again. But then there's like a different type of intimacy between someone and their prayers. So when you're speaking and you hear, I mean, when you're listening or you're reading someone's prayers to God and you hear them speaking about their fear and their terror and their like, God, where are you? God, help me. God, help me conquer my enemies. Like, think of where David was. David was a king, and he was exalted there. Not exalted. He was put there unknowingly. Like, it was like one day I'm a shepherd boy, and the next I am a king, the king of Israel.
Yeah,
And
he was
so
anointed.
yeah, he was anointed. Exactly. There's the word. And so through that, you are watching this process of this boy becoming a man, and not only a man, but a king. And then to get an insight into his prayers at that time, like, make me brave, make me courageous, make me, and it's like you watch him um grow and evolve through his humbleness, through his surrender, through his kneeling to the Father. And you watch him, he's crying out and he's asking, begging for courage, for bravery, for understanding, for wisdom. He's praying for these things. And if you were to see him asking a man for this, you would call him weak. But when you're asking God for it, you're actually very wise. It's a sense of strength, because like the Lord says, um, blessed are those who have seen me and believe, but also blessed are those who have never seen me and still believe. Think about how difficult it is to have never seen the Lord, never felt the Lord, never, even spoken to the Lord and still say, I'm a believer. And then people say, oh, your fairy tale father, your imaginary friend. Like, think about how that feels when, like, think if you were crazy. Like, if someone was to deem you as crazy because of something you were doing, people feel like, oh, they're going to put me in a psychiatric ward. They're going to put me here. They're going to do this. When people start throwing out insults like that, you're crazy, you're schizophrenic, you're this, you're that. So when you're thinking about your relationship with the Father and how intimate that is and how personal it is and how courageous you have to be when someone comes to you and says, do you believe? If you do, then this X, Y, and Z happens. And you still have to acknowledge that based on your conviction and your understanding and the relationship you have with him. There's nothing weak about that. It's the furthest thing from weakness I've ever seen. And when I was mentioning Psalms, I meant to wrap that up. I was just saying, when you read these intimate prayers and when you understand what he was going through, not only as a man, but as a king, as a leader, everybody would deem David as strong. But when you read what he was praying to the Lord, he actually was the opposite. He conveyed an image to the world, not saying he didn't have a strong mind, a strong this, a strong that, but he was empowered by God, because when you hear his prayers to God, he actually was battling the same things that you would think a weak man was battling, you know?
Yep, exactly. And I think that people confuse, meekness with weakness, right?
That's
Jesus
right.
taught humility, forgiveness, and turning the other cheek, right? So the world sees this as soft, right?
Yeah.
If you say, "Hey, I'm teaching you about forgiveness, I'm teaching you about humility, and I'm teaching you about, turn the other cheek, and if you need to, go the extra mile," right? Most people nowadays will say, "Well, this is weak," right? But Jesus wasn't telling us to be passive. He was teaching us actually something that is required in order for you to have strength, which is self-control and moral courage. All right. So in order for you to have self-control, you have to learn self-control, right? So he's teaching you not to be weak. He's teaching you self-control and courage. He's saying humility, right? Humility requires self-control. Forgiveness requires control. Turning the other cheek, going the extra mile requires control. And only someone who has strength can control this, right? This means you're doing exactly what he's asking you to do, which is control your flesh, which we see. If we want to talk about weak, we see majority of the world can't control their own flesh, right? Jesus is calling for us to do the hardest thing in the world, which is control our flesh, which is why I don't understand people who say, Christianity is weak. And I've actually talked to and I've seen a lot of people online who converted from being Christians to Islam because they're like, well, people in Islam, they're strong and they this and they that and they aggressive and blah 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 blah. And Christianity, they don't do any of those things. They're weak, blah 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 blah. Do you not understand that it's easy to punch someone in the face when you're mad? Do you understand that? If I'm angry, right, it's easy for me to say, well, I'm angry, so I just punched you. But it is hard for someone to have done something to you and you have self-control to not commit a crime back to them. Do you understand? They're missing the whole point of what Jesus is teaching. He's teaching you to control. This is strength. If someone punches you in the face, it's easy to say, well, we'll just go ahead and punch them back.
I mean, think of the
But
parable
it's
of
harder. Yeah,
think of the parable of the unforgiving servant.
exactly.
You look at that and you say, "Oh, how many times I'm supposed to forgive? Okay, this many times. 70 times, 77 times seven."
Hmm.
Um, and then you look at it and you're trying to calculate how many times you have to forgive or these or this, and so Jesus breaks it down into this parable, telling about how the king forgives the servant, and then you go within your own wicked heart to be able to persecute someone or put them in prison or whatever the case may be because they couldn't pay you back. So you don't extend the same forgiveness that you were given. And so it's very difficult for us. And I'm sure the Lord knows how difficult it is for us to forgive. Think about, women who have to forgive abuse, SA, people who have to forgive, child abuse, what people who have to forgive, um, theft, murder. Like, do we understand how hard that is? How hard it is to forgive things that seem unforgivable? But as a believer,
Exactly.
God calls you to, He actually tells you you won't make it into the kingdom of heaven with an unforgiving heart. So He's
Exactly.
making it a commandment. This is a commandment. So I mean, I don't really understand the
Well, it's because
correlation.
they're misunderstanding because they haven't actually read and they don't understand the character of the God we serve, right? Jesus is not teaching you to be weak.
Line.
He's teaching you meekness,
Yeah.
right? There's a difference between weakness and meekness, right? Meekness means strength under control, right? This means controlled strength, controlled anger, controlled endurance, controlled stamina, controlled passiveness, controlled aggression. It means control. Meekness is control, self control, controlled lust, control this, control that. He's calling for anything that you can face in life. I need you to control that because you're going to be tested at a point. Following me means you're going to be tested. So I need you to be controlled in all aspects because when it's time to be tested, it's easy to say you want to persecute the people who don't believe in me, right? Think about this way. If Jesus didn't teach this, right? The people who are following him because they know that he is the Messiah, they know he is God, right? If he didn't teach them this, they would be no different than the Muslims. They wouldn't be no different than the Jews who want to persecute them because of their belief, right? But he's teaching you this because he's calling for you to be different. He's saying, even the ones who don't believe in me, you have no right to persecute them. Just try to figure out a way to get them to believe, right? Versus everyone else, look at us. All the other religions, they want to persecute us because they want to be aggressive towards us. They want their aggression to be on us, like, you need to convert. God, Jesus is not God. And they persecute us because they don't even want to listen. They have no control. They have no self-control in their religion. They're not being taught meekness. They're only being taught to be aggressive. And this is not control. This is easy.
Yeah.
This is why you see little children. Little children get upset. You say no, they get mad. Jesus is calling for you to have control.
Yeah, like when we had the stream about the atheists and someone